Chapter 13 of the last journals of David Livingstone in Central Africa from 1865 to his death, Volume 1 of 2, 1866 through 1868, by David Livingstone and Horace Waller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13 Cataracts of the Kalongosi. Passage of the river disputed. Leeches and method of detaching them. Said bin Habib's slaves escape. Enormous collection of tusks. Ill. Theory of the Nile sources. Tribute to Miss Tinney. Notes on climate. Separation of Lake Nyassa from the Nile system. Observations on Victoria Nyanza. Slaves dying. Repentant deserters. Muhammad Bagharib. Enraged Imbazwa. An attack. Narrow escape. Renewed attack. A parley. Help arrives. Bin Juma. March from the Imbazwa country. Slaves escape. Burial of Said bin Habib's brother. Singular custom. An elephant killed. Native game laws. Rumor of Baker's expedition. Christmas dinners. 11th October, 1868. From Kazinga north, the country is all covered with forest, and thrown up into ridges of hardened sandstone, capped occasionally with fine-grained clay schist. Trees often appear of large size and of species closely resembling the gum copal tree. On the heights, masucos and rhododendrons are found, and when exposed they are bent away from the southeast. Animals, as buffaloes and elephants, are plentiful but wild. Rivulets numerous and running now as briskly as brooks do after much rain in England. All on the southwestern side of Kalongosi are subjects of Kasembi, that is, Balunda or Imbazwa. It was gratifying to see the Bayamwezi carrying their sick in cots slung between two men. In the course of time they tired of this, and one man, who was carried several days, remained with Chuma. We crossed the Luongo far above where we first became acquainted with it, and near its source in Irungu or Usungu hills, then the Lobubu, a godly stream 30 yards broad and rapid with fine falls above our ford, which goes into Kalongosi. 6th October, 1868. Crossed the Papusi, and a mile beyond the Luena of 40 yards and knee-deep. Here we were met by about 400 of Kabanda's men, as if they were come to dispute our passage at the ford. I went over, all were civil, but had we shown any weakness, they would no doubt have taken advantage of it. 7th October, 1868. We came to the Kalongosi, flowing over 5 cataracts made by 5 islets in a place called Kabarumi. Near the Mbamba, a goodly rivulet joins it. 12th October, 1868. We came to the Kalongosi at the ford named Musolo. By pacing, I found it to be 240 yards broad and thigh-deep at the end of the dry season. It ran so strongly that it was with difficulty I could keep my feet. Here 500 at least of Nasama's people stood on the opposite shore to know what we wanted. 2 fathoms of calico were sent over, and then I and 30 guns went over to protect the people in the ford. As we approached, they retired. I went to them and told them that I had been to Nasama's, and he gave me a goat and food, and we were good friends. Some had seen me there, and they now crowded to look till the Arabs thought it unsafe for me to be among them. If I had come with bared skin, they would have fled. All became friendly, an elephant was killed, and we remained 2 days buying food. We passed down between the ranges of hills on the east of Moero, the path we followed when we first visited Kasembe. 20th and 21st October, 1868. From Luau, I went over to the chief village of Muabo and begged him to show me the excavations in his country. He declined by saying that I came from a crowd of people and must go to Kabwabata and wait a while there. Meanwhile, he would think what he should do, whether to refuse or invite me to come. He evidently does not wish me to see his strongholds. All his people could go into them, though over 10,000. They are all abundantly supplied with water, and they form the storehouses for grain. 22nd October, 1868. We came to Kabwabata, and I hope I may find a way to other underground houses. It is probable that they are not the workmanship of the ancestors of the present occupants, for they ascribe their formation invariably to the deity Mulungu or Reza. If their forefathers had made them, some tradition would have existed of them. 3rd October, 1868. Said bin Habib came over from Mopwetos. He reports Lualaba and Lufira flowing into the lake of Kinkonza. Lungabale is paramount chief of Rua. Maparahala horns measured 3 feet long and 3 inches in diameter at the base. This is the yellow kulata of Makololo, bastard gemsbuck of the Dutch. 27th, 29th, and 30th October, 1868. Salim bin Habib was killed by the people in Rua. He had put up a tent and they attacked it in the night and stabbed him through it. Said bin Habib waged a war of vengeance all through Rua after this for the murder of his brother. Sef's raid may have led the people to the murder. 29th October, 1868. In coming north in September and October, the last months of the dry season, I crossed many burns flowing quite in the manner of our brooks at home. After a great deal of rain here, however, the water was clear, and the banks not abraded in the least. Some rivulets had a tinge of white in them, as if of felspar in disintegrating granite. Some nearly stagnant burns had as if milk and water in them, and some red oxide of iron. Where leeches occur, they need no coaxing to bite, but fly at the white skin like furies and refuse to let go. With the fingers benumbed, though the water is only 60 degrees, one may twist them round the finger and tug, but they slip through. I saw the natives detaching them with a smart slap of the palm, and found it quite effectual. Swifts, Senegal swallows, and common dark-bellied swallows appeared at Kazinga in the beginning of October. Other birds, as drongo shrikes, a bird with a reddish bill, but otherwise like a grey linnet, keep in flocks yet. 5th December. They pair now. The kite came sooner than the swallows. I saw the first at Bangweolo on the 20th July, 1868. 1st November, 1868. At Kabwabata, we are waiting till Said comes up that we may help him. He has an enormous number of tusks and bars of copper, sufficient, it seems, for all his people to take forward, going and returning 3 times over. He has large canoes on the lake and will help us in return. 2nd November, 1868. News came yesterday from Mopwetos that 21 slaves had run away from Said bin Habab at one time. They were Rua people and out of the chains, as they were considered safe when fairly over the Lualaba, but they showed their love of liberty on the first opportunity. Mopweto is suspected to have harbored them or helped them over the river. This will probably lead to Said attacking him, as he has done to so many chiefs in Rua. In this case, Mopweto will have no sympathy. He is so wanting in the spirit of friendliness to others. 3rd November, 1868. Sent off men to hasten Said onwards. We start in 2 or 3 days. The oldest map known to be in existence is the map of the Ethiopian gold mines, dating from the time of Sethos I, the father of Ramesses II, long enough before the time of the bronze table of Aristogoras, on which was inscribed the circuit of the whole earth, and all the sea and all the rivers. Tyler, page 90, quoted from Birch's Archaeologica, volume 34, page 382. Sesostris was the first to distribute his maps. 8th November, 1868. Said bin Habib is said to have amassed 150 frasilas of ivory, equals 5,250 pounds, and 300 frasilas of copper, equals 10,500 pounds. With 100 carriers, he requires to make 4 relays, or otherwise make the journey 4 times over at every stage. 21 of his slaves ran away in one night, and only 4 were caught again. They were not all bought, nor was the copper and ivory come at by fair means. The murder of his brother was a good excuse for plunder, murder, and capture. Mopweto is suspected of harboring them as living on the banks of the Lualaba, for they could not get over without assistance from his canoes and people. Mopweto said, "Remove from me, and we shall see if they come this way." They are not willing to deliver fugitives up. Said sent for Elmas, the only thing of the Mullam or clerical order here, probably to ask if the Koran authorizes him to attack Mopweto. Mullam will reply, yes, certainly. If Maputo won't restore your slaves, take what you can by force. Side's bloodshed is now pretty large, and he is becoming afraid for his own life. If he ceases not, he will himself be caught some day. Ill of fever 2 days. Better and thankful. Whilst waiting to start for Ujiji, Livingstone was intensely occupied on the great problem of the Nile and the important part he had taken so recently in solving it. He writes at this date as follows. The discovery of the sources of the Nile is somewhat akin in importance to the discovery of the Northwest Passage, which called forth, though in a minor degree, the energy, the perseverance, and the pluck of Englishmen, and anything that does that is beneficial to the nation and to its posterity. The discovery of the sources of the Nile possesses, moreover, an element of interest which the Northwest Passage never had. The great men of antiquity have recorded their ardent desires to know the fountains of what Homer called Egypt's heaven-descended spring. Sesostris, the first who in camp with his army made and distributed maps, not to Egyptians only, but to the Scythians, naturally wished to know the springs, says Eustathius, of the river on whose banks he flourished. Alexander the Great, who founded a celebrated city at this river's mouth, looked up the stream with the same desire, and so did the Caesars. The great Julius Caesar is made by Lucan to say that he would give up the civil war if he might but see the fountains of this far-famed river. Nero Caesar sent 2 centurions to examine the Caput Nili. They reported that they saw the river rushing with great force from 2 rocks, and beyond that it was lost in immense marshes. This was probably native information concerning the cataracts of the Nile and a long space above them, which had already been enlarged by others into 2 hills with sharp conical tops called Crophi and Mophi, midway between which lay the fountains of the Nile, fountains which it was impossible to fathom, and which gave forth half their water to Ethiopia in the south, and the other half to Egypt in the north, that which these men failed to find, and that which many great minds in ancient times longed to know, has in this late age been brought to light by the patient toil and laborious perseverance of Englishmen. In laying a contribution to this discovery at the feet of his countrymen, the writer desires to give all the honor to his predecessors which they deserve. The work of Speke and Grant is deserving of the highest commendation, inasmuch as they opened up an immense tract of previously unexplored country, in the firm belief they were bringing to light the head of the Nile. No one can appreciate the difficulties of their feat unless he has gone into new country. In association with Captain Burton, Speke came much nearer to the Koi fountains than at the Victoria Nyanza, but they all turned their backs on them. Mr. Baker showed courage and perseverance worthy of an Englishman in following out the hints given by Speke and Grant. But none rises higher in my estimation than the Dutch lady, Miss Tenay, who, after the severest domestic afflictions, nobly persevered in the teeth of every difficulty, and only turned away from the object of her expedition after being assured by Speke and Grant that they had already discovered in Victoria Nyanza the sources she sought. Had they not given their own mistaken views, the wise foresight by which she provided a steamer would inevitably have led her to pull up, and by canoes to reach Lake Bangweolo's sources full 500 miles south of the most southerly part of Victoria Nyanza. She evidently possesses some of the indomitable pluck of Van Tromp, whose tomb every Englishman who goes to Holland must see. Her doctor was made a baron. Were she not a Dutch lady already, we think she ought to be made a duchess. By way of contrast with what, if I live through it, I shall have to give, I may note some of the most prominent ideas entertained of this world-renowned river. Ptolemy, the geographer who lived in the 2nd century and was not a king of Egypt, with the most ancient maps, made the Nile rise from the Montes Lunae between 10 and 12 south latitude, by 6 several streams which flowed north into 2 lakes, situated east and west of each other. These streams flowed about west of his river Rafata, or Raptus, which is probably our Rovuma or Luuma. This was very near the truth, but the mountains of the moon cannot be identified with the Loginga, or mountains of Bisa, from which many of the springs do actually arise. Unless indeed we are nearer to the great alterations in climate which have taken place, as we are supposed to be nearer the epoch of the Mammoth, Oryx, and others. Snow never lay in these latitudes, on altitudes of 6,000 feet above the sea. Some of the ancients supposed the river to have its source in the ocean. This was like the answer we received long ago from the natives on the Liambai or Upper Zambezi when inquiring for its source. It rises in Laotale, the white man's sea, or Methuselah. The second name means the grazing water, from the idea of the tides coming in to graze. As to the freshness of the Liambai waters, they could give no explanation. Some again thought that the Nile rose in western Africa, and after flowing eastwards across the continent, turned northwards to Egypt, and others still thought that it rose in India, and others again, from vague reports collected from their slaves, made it and several other rivers rise but of a great inland sea. Achalunda was said to be the name of this lake, and in the language of Angola it meant the sea. It means only of or belonging to Lunda, a country. It might have been a sea that was spoken of on a whole, or anything. Nyasi, or the sea, was another name and another blunder. Nyasi means long grass and nothing else. Nyanza, contracted into Nyasa, means lake, marsh, any piece of water, or even the dry bed of a lake. The N and Y are joined in the mouth and never pronounced separately. The Nyanza, it would be nearer the mark to say the Nancy. Of all theoretical discoverers, the man who ran in 200 miles of lake and placed them on a height of some 4,000 feet at the northwest end of Lake Nyasa deserves the highest place. Dr. Beek, in his guess, came nearer the source than most others, but after all he pointed out where they would not be found. Old Nile played the theorists a pretty prank by having his springs 500 miles south of them all. I call mine a contribution, because it is just 100 years 1769, since Bruce, a greater traveler than any of us, visited Abyssinia, and having discovered the sources of the Blue Nile, he thought that he had then solved the ancient problem. Am I to be cut out by someone discovering southern fountains of the river of Egypt, of which I have now no conception? David Livingstone. The tiresome procrastination of Muhammad and his horde was not altogether an unmixed evil. With so many new discoveries in hand, Livingstone had an opportunity for working out several problems and instituting comparisons between the phenomena of inner Africa and the well-marked changes which go on in other parts of the world. We find him at this time summing them up as follows. The subject of change of climate from alteration of level has not received the investigation it deserves. Mr. Darwin saw reason to believe that very great alterations of altitude and of course of climate had taken place in South America and the islands of the Pacific. The level of a country above the sea, I believe, he thought to be as variable as the winds. A very great alteration of altitude has also taken place in Africa. This is apparent on the sea coast of Angola and all through the center of the country, where large rivers which once flowed southwards and westwards are no longer able to run in these directions. The general desiccation of the country, as seen in the beds of large rivers and of enormous lakes, tells the same tale. Portions of the east coast have sunk, others have risen, even in the historic period. The upper or northern end of the Red Sea has risen, so that the place of the passage of the children of Israel is now between 40 and 50 miles from Suez, the modern head of the Gulf. This upheaval, and not the sand from the desert, caused the disuse of the ancient canal across the isthmus. It took place since the Mohammedan conquest of Egypt. The women of the Jewish captives were carried past the end of the Red Sea and along the Mediterranean in ox wagons, where such cattle would now all perish for want of water and pasture. In fact, the route to Assyria would have proved more fatal to captives than the Middle Passage has been to Africans since. It may be true that as the desert is now, it could not have been traversed by the multitude under Moses. The German strictures put forth by Dr. Colenso, under the plea of the progress of science, assume that no alteration has taken place in either desert or climate, but a scientific examination of the subject would have ascertained what the country was then when it afforded pasture to flocks and herds, and even very much cattle. We know that Ezion Geber was, with its docks on the seashore, with water in abundance for the ship carpenters. It is now far from the head of the Alaic Gulf in a parched desert. Aden, when visited by the Portuguese Balthasar less than 300 years ago, was a perfect garden, but it is now a vast conglomeration of black volcanic rocks, with so little vegetation that on seeing flocks of goats driven out, I thought of the Irish cabman at an ascent slamming the door of his cab and whispering to his fare, "Wish it's to deceive the baste. He thinks that you are out walking." Gigantic tanks in great numbers and the ruins of aqueducts appear as relics of the past, where no rain now falls for 3 or more years at a time. They have all dried up by a change of climate, possibly similar and contemporaneous with that which has dried up the Dead Sea. The journey of Ezra was undertaken after a fast at the river Ahava. With nearly 50,000 people, he had only about 8,000 beasts of burden. He was ashamed to ask a band of soldiers and horsemen for protection in the way. It took about 4 months to reach Jerusalem. This would give 5.5 or 6 miles a day, as the crow flies, which is equal to 12 or 15 miles of surface traveled over. This bespeaks of a country capable of yielding both provisions and water, such as cannot now be found. Ezra would not have been ashamed to ask for camels to carry provisions and water had the country been as dry as it is now. The prophets, in telling all the woes and miseries of the captivities, never allude to suffering or perishing by thirst in the way, or being left to rot in the rout as African slaves are now in a well-watered country. Had the route to Assyria been then as it is now, they could scarcely have avoided referring to the thirst of the way, but everything else is mentioned except that. Respecting the system of lakes in the center of Africa, it will possibly occur to some that Lake Nyassa may give a portion of its water off from its northern end to the Nile. But this would imply a lake giving off a river at both ends. The country, too, on the northwest and northeast, rises from 4,000 to 6,000 feet above the sea, and there is not the smallest indication that Nyassa and Tanganyika were ever connected. Lake Liemba is the most southerly part of Tanganyika. Its latitude is 8 degrees 46 minutes south. The most northerly point of Lake Nyassa is probably 10 degrees 58 minutes minus 8 degrees 46 minutes equals 2 degrees 10 minutes. Longitude of Liemba, 34 degrees 57 minutes minus 31 degrees 57 minutes equals 3 degrees 0 minutes equals 180 minutes of longitude. Of latitude, 130 minutes plus 180 minutes equals 310 minutes, 2/3 of which is about 206 minutes, the distance between the two lakes, and no evidence of fissure, rent, or channel now appears on the highland between. Again, Liemba is 3,000 feet above the sea. The altitude of Nyassa is 12,000 by 800 feet. Tanganyika would thus go to Nyassa, down the Shire, into the Zambezi and the sea, if a passage existed even below ground. The large lake, said to exist to the northwest of Tanganyika, might, however, send a branch to the Nile, but the land rises up into a high ridge east of this lake. It is somewhat remarkable that the impression which intelligent Swahili, who have gone into Karangwe, have received is, that the Kentugle flows from Tanganyika into Lake Ukerewe. One of Said bin Omar's people put it to me very forcibly the other day by saying, "Kitangule is an arm of Tanganyika." He had not followed it out, but that Dagara, the father of Rumanika, should have in his lifetime seriously proposed to deepen the upper part of it, so as to allow canoes to pass from his place to Ujiji, is very strong evidence of the river being large on the Tanganyika side. We know it to be of good size, and requiring canoes on the Ukerewe side. Burton came to the very silly conclusion that when a native said a river ran one way, he meant that it flowed in the opposite direction. Ujiji, in Rumanika's time, was the only mart for merchandise in the country. Garaganza or Galaganza has most trade and influence now. 14th September 1868. Okara is the name by which Victoria Nyanza is known on the eastern side, and an arm of it, called Kavirondo, is about 40 miles broad. Lake Baringo is a distinct body of water some 50 miles broad, and giving off a river called Nagardabash, which flows eastwards into the Somali country. Lake Naibash is more to the east than Kavirondo, and about 50 miles broad, too. It gives off the river Kadete, which is supposed to flow into Lufu. It is southeast of Kavirondo, and Kilimanjaro can be seen from its shores. In the southeast, Okara, Naibash, and Baringo seem to have been run by Speke into one lake. Okara in the south is full of large islands and has but little water between them. That little is encumbered with aquatic vegetation called tika tika, on which, as in Lakelet Gumadona, a man can walk. Water lilies and duckweed are not the chief part of this floating mass. In the north, Okara is large. Burunkege land is the boundary between the people of Kavirondo and the Galos, with camels and horses. 9th November 1868. Copied several notes written at Kazinga and elsewhere, and at Kabwabata. Resume journal. Some slight showers have cooled the air a little. This is the hottest time of the year. 10th November 1868. A heavier shower this morning will have more of the same effect. 11th November 1868. Moabo visited this village but refuses to show his underground houses. 13th November 1868. I was on the point of starting without Muhammad Baghrib, but he begged me not to go till he had settled some weighty matter about a wife he is to get at Ujiji from Mapari. We must have the new moon, which will appear in 3 days, for lucky starting, and will leave Said bin Habib at Chisabi's. Meanwhile, 2 women slaves ran away, and Said has only got back 5 of his 21 fugitives. Mullum was mild with his decisions and returned here. He informed me that many of Said's slaves, about 40, fled. Of those who cannot escape, many die, evidently broken-hearted. They are captives, and not, as slaves often are, criminals sold for their guilt, hence the great mortality caused by being taken to the sea to be, as they believe, fattened and eaten. Poor things, heaven help them. Ujiji is pronunciation of the Bayamwezi, and they call the people Waiwai, exactly as the same people styled themselves on the river Zoga near Nagami. It will be remembered that several of his men refused to go to Lake Bangweolo with him. They seem now to have thought better of it, and on his return are anxious to come back to their old master, who, for his part, is evidently willing to overlook a great deal. I have taken all the runaways back again. After trying the independent life, they will behave better. Much of their ill conduct may be ascribed to seeing that after the flight of the Johanna men, I was entirely dependent on them. More enlightened people often take advantage of men in similar circumstances, though I have seen pure Africans come out generously to aid one abandoned to their care. I have faults myself. 15th November 1868. The Arabs have some tradition of the Emir Musa coming as far south as the Jaga country. Some say he lived northeast of Suna, now Matiza, but it is so mixed up with fable and tales of the Genii, Mageni, that it cannot refer to the great Moses, concerning whose residence at Meroe and marriage of the king of Ethiopia's daughter there is also some vague tradition further north. The only thing of interest to me is the city of Meroe, which is lost and may, if built by ancient Egyptians, still be found. The Africans all beckon with the hand to call a person, in a different way from what Europeans do. The hand is held, as surgeons say, prone, or palm down, while we beckon with the hand held supine, or palm up. It is quite natural in them, for the idea in their mind is to lay the hand on the person and draw him towards them. If the person wished for is near, say 40 yards off, the beckoner puts out his right hand on a level with his breast and makes the motion of catching the other by shutting the fingers and drawing him to himself. If the person is further off, this motion is exaggerated by lifting up the right hand as high as he can see. He brings it down with a sweep towards the ground, the hand still being held prone as before. In nodding assent, they differ from us by lifting the chin up instead of bringing it down as we do. The lifting up the chin looks natural after a short usage therewith, and is perhaps purely conventional, not natural, as the other seems to be. 16th November, 1868. I am tired out by waiting after finishing the journal, and will go off tomorrow north. Simon killed a zebra after I had taken the above resolution, and this supply of meat makes delay bearable, for besides flesh, of which I had none, we can buy all kinds of grain and pulse for the next few days. The women of the adjacent villages crowd into this as soon as they hear of an animal killed, and sell all the produce of their plantations for meat. 17th November, 1868. It is said that on the road to the Great Salt Lake in America, the bones and skulls of animals lie scattered everywhere, yet travelers are often put to great straits for fuel. This, if true, is remarkable among a people so apt in turning everything to account as the Americans. When we first steamed up the river Shiré, our fuel ran out in the Elephant Marsh, where no trees exist, and none could be reached without passing through many miles on either side of impassable swamp, covered with reeds, and intersected everywhere with deep branches of the river. Coming to a spot where an elephant had been slaughtered, I at once took the bones on board, and these, with the bones of a second elephant, enabled us to steam briskly up to where the wood abounded. The Scythians, according to Herodotus, used the bones of the animal sacrificed to boil the flesh. The gauchos of South America do the same when they have no fuel. The ox thus boils himself. 18th November, 1868. A pretty little woman ran away from her husband and came to Mpamari. Her husband brought 3 hose, a checked cloth, and 2 strings of large neck beads to redeem her, but this old fellow wants her for himself, and by native law he can keep her as his slave wife. Slave owners make a bad neighborhood, for the slaves are always running away, and the headmen are expected to restore the fugitives for a bit of cloth. An old woman of Mpamari fled 3 times. She was caught yesterday, and tied to a post for the young slaves to plague her. Her daughter burst into an agony of tears on seeing them tying her mother, and Mpamari ordered her to be tied to the mother's back for crying. I interceded for her, and she was let go. He said, "You don't care, though Syed Majid loses his money." I replied, "Let the old woman go. She will be off again tomorrow." But they cannot bear to let a slave have her freedom. I don't understand what effects his long prayers and prostrations towards the Qibla have on his mind. They cannot affect the minds of his slaves favorably, nor do they mine, though I am as charitable as most people. 19th November, 1868. I prepared to start today, but Mohammed Baghrib has been very kind and indeed cooked meals for me from my arrival at Casembes, 6th May last, till we came here, 22nd October. The food was coarse enough, but still it was food, and I did not like to refuse his genuine hospitality. He now begged of me not to go for 3 days, and then he would come along with me. Mpamari also entreated. I would not have minded him, but they have influence with canoe men on Tanganyika, and it is well not to get a bad name if possible. 20th November, 1868. Mohammed Baghrib purposed to attack 2 villages near to this from an idea that the people there concealed his runaway slaves. By remaining, I think I have put a stop to this, as he did not like to pillage while I was in company. Mpamari also turned round towards peace, though he called all the riff-raff to muster, and caracoled among them like an old broken-winded horse. One man became so excited with yelling that the others had to disarm him, and then he fell down as if in a fit. Water poured on his head brought him to calmness. We go on the 22nd. 22nd November, 1868. This evening, the Imbwazwa or Babemba came at dusk and killed a Wanyamwezi woman on one side of the village and a woman and child on the other side of it. I took this to be the result of the warlike demonstration mentioned above, but one of Mohammed Baghrib's people, named Bin Juma, had gone to a village on the north of this and seized 2 women and 2 girls, in lieu of 4 slaves who had run away. The headman, resenting this, shot an arrow into one of Bin Junta's party, and Bin Juma shot a woman with his gun. This, it turned out, had roused the whole country, and next morning we were assailed by a crowd of Imbazwa on 3 sides. We had no stockade, but the men built one as fast as the enemy allowed, cutting down trees and carrying them to the line of defense, while others kept the assailants at bay with their guns. Had it not been for the crowd of Banyamwezi which we have, who shot vigorously with their arrows and occasionally chased the Imbazwa, we would have been routed. I did not go near the fighting, but remained in my house to defend my luggage if necessary. The women went up and down the villages with sieves, as if winnowing, and singing songs, and luluing, to encourage their husbands and friends who were fighting. Each had a branch of the ficus indica in her hand, which she waved, I supposed, as a charm. About 10 of the Imbazwa are said to have been killed, but dead and wounded were at once carried off by their countrymen. They continued the assault from early dawn till 1 p.m., and showed great bravery, but they wounded only 2 with their arrows. Their care to secure the wounded was admirable. 2 or 3 at once seized the fallen man and ran off with him, though pursued by a great crowd of Banyamwezi with spears, and fired at by the Swahili. Victoria Cross fellows, truly, many of them were. Those who had a bunch of animals' tails with medicine tied to their waist came sidling and ambling up to near the unfinished stockade and shot their arrows high up into the air to fall among the Wanyamwezi, then picked up any arrows on the field, ran back, and returned again. They thought that by the ambling gait they avoided the balls, and when these whistled past them they put down their heads as if to allow them to pass over. They had never encountered guns before. We did not know it, but Muabu, Futa, Ngure, Sandaruko, and Chapi were the assailants, for we found it out by the losses each of these 5 chiefs sustained. It was quite evident to me that the Swahili Arabs were quite taken aback by the attitude of the natives. They expected them to flee as soon as they heard a gun fired in anger, but instead of this we were very nearly being cut off, and should have been but for our Byamwezi allies. It is fortunate that the attacking party had no success in trying to get Maputo and Karembwe to join them against us, or it would have been more serious still. 24th November 1868. The Mbazwa, or Babemba rather, came early this morning and called on Mohammed to come out of his stockade if he were a man who could fight, but the fence is now finished and no one seems willing to obey the taunting call. I have nothing to do with it, but feel thankful that I was detained and did not, with my few attendants, fall into the hands of the justly infuriated Babemba. They kept up the attack today, and some went out to them fighting till noon, when a man was killed and not carried off, though Wanyamwezi brought his head and put it on a pole on the stockade. 6 heads were thus placed. A fine young man was caught and brought in by the Wanyamwezi. One stabbed him behind, another cut his forehead with an axe. I called in vain to them not to kill him. As a last appeal, he said to the crowd that surrounded him, "Don't kill me, and I shall take you to where the women are." "You lie," said his enemies. "You intend to take us where we may be shot by your friends." And they killed him. It was horrible. I protested loudly against any repetition of this wickedness, and the more sensible agreed that the prisoners ought not to be killed, but the Byamwezi are incensed against the Babemba because of the women killed on the 22nd. 25th November, 1868. The Babemba kept off on the 3rd day, and the Arabs are thinking it will be a good thing if we get out of the country unscathed. Men were sent off on the night of the 23rd to Said bin Habib for powder and help. Mohammed Baghrib is now unwilling to take the onus of the war. He blames Mapamari, and Mapamari blames him. I told Mohammed that the war was undoubtedly his work, inasmuch as Benjuma is his man, and he approved of his seizing the women. He does not like this, but it is true. He would not have entered a village of Kasembe or Mwamba or Chikumbi as he did Chapi's man's village. The people here are simply men of more mettle than he imagined, and his folly in beginning a war in which, if possible, his slaves will slip through his hands is apparent to all, even to himself. Said sent 4 barrels of gunpowder and 10 men who arrived during last night. 27th November, 1868. 2 of Muabo's men came over to bring on a parley. One told us that he had been on the south side of the village before and heard one man say to another, "Mo Pige," shoot him. Mapamari gave them a long oration in exculpation, but it was only the same everlasting story of fugitive slaves. The slave traders cannot prevent them from escaping and impudently think that the country people ought to catch them, and thus be their humble servants and also the persecutors of their own countrymen. If they cannot keep them, why buy them? Why put their money into a bag with holes? It is exactly what took place in America. Slave owners are bad neighbors everywhere. Canada was threatened, England browbeaten, and the Northerners all but kicked on the same score, and all as if property in slaves had privileges which no other goods have. To hear the Arabs say of the slaves after they are fled, "Oh, they are bad, bad, very bad, and they entreated me, too, to free them from the yoke," is, as the young ladies say, too absurd. The chiefs also who do not apprehend fugitives, they, too, are bad. I proposed to Mohammed Baghrib to send back the women seized by Benjuma to show the Babemba that he disapproved of the act and was willing to make peace, but this was too humiliating. I added that their price as slaves was 4 barrels of gunpowder, or $160, while slaves lawfully bought would have cost him only 8 or 10 yards of calico each. At the conclusion of Mapamari's speech, the 4 barrels of gunpowder were exhibited, and so was the Koran, to impress them, Moabo's people, with an idea of their great power. 28th and 29th November 1868. It is proposed to go and force our way if we can to the north, but all feel that that would be a fine opportunity for the slaves to escape, and they would not be loth to embrace it. This makes it a serious matter, and the Koran is consulted at hours which are auspicious. 30th November 1868. Messenger sent to Mwabo to ask a path, or in plain words, protection from him. Mpamari protests his innocence of the whole affair. 1st December 1868. Mwabo's people over again. Would fain send them to make peace with Chapi. 2nd December 1868. The detention is excessively vexatious to me. Mwabo sent 3 slaves as offers of peace, a fine self-imposed, but he is on our south side and we wish to go north. 3rd December 1868. A party went today to clear the way to the north, but were warmly received by Babemba with arrows. They came back with 1 woman captured, and they say that they killed 1 man. One of themselves is wounded and many others in danger. Others who went east were shot at and wounded too. 4th December 1868. A party went east and were fain to flee from the Babemba. The same thing occurred on our west, and today, 5th, all were called to strengthen the stockade for fear that the enemy may enter uninvited. The slaves would certainly flee, and small blame to them though they did. Mpamari proposed to go off north by night, but his people objected, as even a child would arouse the Babemba and reveal the flight. So finally he sent off to ask Said what he should do, whether to retire by day or by night, probably entreating Said to come and protect him. A sort of idol is found in every village in this part. It is of wood and represents the features, markings, and fashion of the hair of the inhabitants. Some have little huts built for them, others are in common houses. The Babemba call them Nakisi, Senkan of the Arabs. The people of Rua name one Kalubi, the plural Tulubi, and they present pombe, flour, bang, tobacco, and light a fire for them to smoke by. They represent the departed father or mother, and it is supposed that they are pleased with the offerings made to their representatives, but all deny that they pray to them. Kasembe has very many of these Nakisi. One with long hair, and named Matumbo, is carried in front when he takes the field. Names of dead chiefs are sometimes given to them. I have not met with anyone intelligent enough to explain if prayers are ever made to anyone. The Arabs who know their language say they have no prayers, and think that at death there is an end of the whole man, but other things lead me to believe this is erroneous. Slaves laugh at their countrymen in imitation of their masters, and will not reveal their real thoughts. One is said that they believed in 2 superior beings, Reza above who kills people, and Reza below who carries them away after death. 6th December 1868. 10 of Said bin Habib's people came over, bringing a letter, the contents of which neither Mapari nor Muhammad cares to reveal. Some think, with great probability, that he asks, "Why did you begin a war if you wanted to leave so soon? Did you not know that the country people would take advantage of your march, encumbered as you will be by women and slaves?" Muhammad Baghrib called me to ask what advice I could give him, as all his own advice, and devices too, had been lost or were useless, and he did not know what to do. The Bayan Wemzi threatened to go off by night and leave him, as they are incensed against the Babemba, and offended because the Arabs do not aid them in wreaking their vengeance upon them. I took care not to give any advice, but said, if I had been or was in his place, I would have sent or would send back Ben Juma's captives, to show that I disapproved of his act, the first in the war, and was willing to make peace with Chapi. He said that he did not know that Ben Juma would capture these people, that Ben Juma had met some natives with fish and took 10 by force, that the natives in revenge caught 3 Bayanwemzi slaves, and Ben Juma then gave 1 slave to them as a fine. But Muhammad did not know of this affair either. I am of opinion, however, that he was fully aware of both matters, and Mpamare's caracoling showed that he knew it all, though he now denies it. Ben Juma is a long, thin, lanky Swahili, 6 feet 2 high, with a hooked nose and large lips. I told Muhammad that if he were to go with us to Mayanuma, the whole party would be cut off. He came here, bought a slave boy, and allowed him to escape, then browbeat Chapi's man about him, and he says 3 others, and caught 10 in lieu of him, of which Muhammad restored 6. This was the origin of the war. Now that we are in the middle of it, I must do as Muhammad does in going off either by day or by night. It is unreasonable to ask my advice now, but it is felt that they have very unjustifiably placed me in a false position, and they fear that Syed Majid will impute blame to them. Meanwhile, Said bin Habib sent a private message to me to come with his men to him and leave this party. I perceive that the plan now is to try and clear our way of Chapi and then march, but I am so thoroughly disgusted with this slave war that I think of running the risk of attack by the country people and to go off tomorrow without Muhammad Baghrib, though I like him much more than I do Mupamari or Said bin Habib. It is too glaring hypocrisy to go to the Koran for guidance while the stolen women, girls, and fish are in bin Juma's hands. 8th and 9th December 1868. I had to wait for the Bayan Wenzi preparing food. Muhammad has no authority over them, or indeed over anyone else. 2 Babemba men came in and said that they had given up fighting and begged for their wives, who had been captured by Said's people on their way here. This reasonable request was refused at first, but better counsels prevailed, and they were willing to give something to appease the anger of the enemy, and sent back 6 captives, 2 of whom were the wives prayed for. At last he makes a start on the 11th of December with the Arabs, who are bound eastwards for Ujiji. It is a motley group composed of Muhammad and his friends, a gang of Unyamwenzi, hangers-on, and strings of wretched slaves yoked together in their heavy slave sticks. Some carry ivory, others copper or food for the march, whilst hope and fear, misery and villainy may be read off on the various faces that pass in line out of this country, like a serpent dragging its accursed folds away from the victim it has paralyzed with its fangs. 11th December, 1868. We marched 4 hours unmolested by the natives, built a fence, and next day crossed the Lokinda River and its feeder, the Mukosi. Here the people belonged to Chisabi, who had not joined the other Babemba. We go between 2 ranges of tree-covered mountains, which are continuations of those on each side of Moero. 12th December, 1868. The tiresome tale of slaves running away was repeated again last night by 2 of Mupamari's making off, though in the yoke, and they have been with him from boyhood. Not one good-looking slave woman is now left of Muhammad Baghrib's fresh slaves. All the pretty ones obtain favor by their address, beg to be unyoked, and then escape. 4 hours brought us to many villages of Chisabi and the camp of Said bin Habib in the middle of a set-in rain, which marred the demonstration at meeting with his relative Mupamari, but the women braved it through, wet to the skin, and danced and lululooed with draggled petticoats with a zeal worthy of a better cause, as the penny-a-liners say. It is the custom for the trader who receives visitors to slaughter goats and feed all his guests for at least 2 days, nor was Said wanting in this hospitality, though the set-in rain continuing, we did not enjoy it as in fine weather. 14th December 1868. Cotton grass and brackens all over the country show the great humidity of Marungu. Rain daily, but this is not the great rain which falls when the sun comes back south over our heads. 15th December 1868. Marched 2 hours only to the range of Tamba. A pretty little light gray owl called Nokwekwe was killed by a native as food. A black ring round its face and its black ears gave it all the appearance of a cat, whose habits it follows. 16th to 18th December 1868. A brother of Said bin Habib died last night. I had made up my mind to leave the whole party, but Said said that Chisabe was not to be trusted, and the death of his brother having happened, it would not be respectful to leave him to bury his dead alone. 6 of his slaves fled during the night, 1 the keeper of the others. A Mobemba man, who had been to the coast twice with him, is said to have wished a woman who was in the chain, so he loosed 5 out and took her off. The others made clear heels of it, and now that the grass is long and green, no one can trace their course. Said told me that the slaves would not have detained him, but his brother's death did. We buried the youth who had been ill 3 months. Mupamari descended into the grave with 4 others. A broad cloth was held over them horizontally, and a little fluctuation made, as if to fan those who were depositing the body in the side excavation made at the bottom. When they had finished, they pulled in earth, and all shoved it towards them till the grave was level. Mulam came and poured a little water into and over the grave, mumbled a few prayers, at which Mpomari said aloud to me, "Mulam does not let his voice be heard." And Mulam smiled to me as if to say, "Loud enough for all I shall get." During the ceremony, the women were all wailing loudly. We went to the usual sitting place and shook hands with Said, as if receiving him back again into the company of the living. Said told me previously to this event that he had fought the people who killed his elder brother Salim bin Habib, and would continue to fight them till all their country was spoiled and a desolation. There is no forgiveness with Muslims for bloodshed. He killed many and took many slaves, ivory, and copper. His tusks number over 200, many of a large size. 19th and 20th December, 1868. To Chesabi's village stockade on the left bank of the Lafunso, which flows in a marshy valley 3 miles broad. 8 of Muhammad Baghrib's slaves fled by night, one with his gun and wife. A large party went in search, but saw nothing of them. Today an elephant was killed, and they sent for the meat, but Chesabi ordered the men to let his meat alone. Experience at Kabwabwata said, "Take the gentle course," so 2 fathoms of calico and 2 hose were sent to propitiate the chief. Chesabi then demanded half the meat and 1 tusk. The meat was given, but the tusk was mildly refused. He is but a youth, and this is the only act of his counselors. It was replied that Kasembe, Chikumbe, Nasama, Merere made no demand at all. His counselors have probably heard of the Portuguese self-imposed law and wish to introduce it here, but both tusks were secured. 22nd December, 1868. We crossed the Lafunso River, wading 3 branches, the first of 47 yards, then the river itself 50 yards, and neck deep to men and women of ordinary size. 2 were swept away and drowned, other 2 were rescued by men leaping in and saving them, one of whom was my man Susi. A crocodile bit one person badly, but was struck and driven off. 2 slaves escaped by night. A woman loosed her husband's yoke from the tree and got clear off. 24th December, 1868. 5 sick people detain us today. Some cannot walk from feebleness and purging brought on by sleeping on the damp ground without clothes. Said bin Habib reports a peculiar breed of goats in Rua, remarkably short in the legs, so much so that they cannot travel far. They give much milk and become very fat, but the meat is indifferent. Gold is found at Katanga in the pool of a waterfall only. It probably comes from the rocks above this. His account of the Lofu, or as he says, West Lulaba, is identical with that of his cousin Said bin Omar. It flows north, but west of Lufira, into the lake of Kinkoza, so named after the chief. The East Lulaba becomes very large, often as much as 6 or 8 miles broad, with many inhabited islands, the people of which, being safe from invasion, are consequently rapacious and dishonest, and their chiefs, Moenge and Nyamkunda, are equally lawless. A hunter belonging to Said, named Kabwebwa, gave much information gleaned during his hunting trips. For instance, the Lufira has 9 feeders of large size, and one, the Lukulwe, has also 9 feeders. Another, the Kasingu, is covered with tika-tika, by which the people cross it, though it bends under their weight. He also ascribes the origin of the Lufira and the Lulaba West, or Lofu, with the Liambe, to one large earthen mound, which he calls Segolo, or an ant hill. 25th December, 1868, Christmas Day. We can buy nothing except the very coarsest food, not a goat or fowl, while Said, having plenty of copper, can get all the luxuries. We marched past Mount Katanga, leaving it on our left, to the river Kapeta, and slaughtered a favorite kid to make a Christmas dinner. A trading party came up from Ujiji. They said that we were 10 camps from Tanganyika. They gave an erroneous report that a steamer with a boat in tow was on Lake Chawambe, an English one too, with plenty of cloth and beads on board. A letter had come from Abdullah bin Salam, Muslim missionary at Matisas, to Ujiji 3 months ago with this news. 26th December, 1868. We marched up an ascent 2.5 hours and got on to the top of one of the mountain ridges, which generally run north and south. 3 hours along this level top brought us to the Kibwai River, a roaring rivulet beside villages. There were no people on the height over which we came. The country is very fine, green and gay with varying shades of that color. We passed through patches of brackens 5 feet high and gingers in flower, and were in a damp cloud all day. Now and then a drizzle falls in these parts, but it keeps all damp only. and does not show in the rain gauge. Neither sun nor stars appear. 27th and 28th December 1868. Remain on Sunday, then march and cross 5 rivulets about 4 yards wide and knee-deep, going to the Lufunso. The grass now begins to cover and hide the paths. Its growth is very rapid. Blobs of water lie on the leaves all day and keep the feet constantly wet by falling as we pass. 29th December 1868. We kept well on the ridge between 2 ranges of hills, then went down and found a partially burned native stockade and lodged in it. The fires of Ujiji party had set the huts on fire after the party left. We are in the Atande district at the Nwispa River. 30th September 1868. We now went due east and made a good deal of easting too from Mount Katanga on the Lufunso, and crossed the river Lokivwa, 12 yards wide and very deep, with villages all about. We ascended much as we went east. Very high mountains appeared on the northwest, the woods dark green with large patches of a paler hue. 31st December 1868. We reached the Lufuko yesterday in a pelting rain, not knowing that the camp with huts was near. I stopped and put on a burnous, got wet, and had no dry clothes. Remained today to buy food. Clouds cover all the sky from the northwest. The river, 30 yards wide, goes to Tanganyika east of this. Scenery very lovely. End of Volume 1. End of Chapter 13. End of the last journals of David Livingstone in Central Africa from 1865 to his death. Volume 1 of 2, 1866 through 1868, by David Livingstone and Horace Waller.